Good afternoon. On behalf of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention and the Federal Partners in Bullying Prevention, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Sexting and Sextortion, Keeping Kids Safe. This is the second webinar in a two-piece series. Our first webinar on Internet safety and cyberbullying was held in October. My name is Sarah Susai, and I am the Management and Program Analyst in the Office of Safe and Healthy Students, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. As your moderator today, I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. Lieutenant Eric Bueller works with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department and is one of the commanders of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Forces. And Supervisory Special Agent Jacob Bailey has been a special agent with the FBI for the past 10 years and is currently serving as a supervisory special agent within the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children Program Management Unit. We are very excited to hear from these presenters today. First, Callie Murray from OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center will share a few features of Adobe Connect.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Callie Murray, and I am with OJJDP's NTTAC. As your host, I would like to take a few minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect, which will help maximize your participation in today's webinar. To view the bios and photos of the presentation panel, please access the PDF documents, which are available in the handout pod of the webinar dashboard. To send a chat message to me, your host, click the menu icon in the upper right corner of the chat pod to start chat with, then select host, presenters, or specific attendees. Type your message into the chat box, then hit enter or click the message bubble icon to send. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. This will help us with our final count. If you are viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything right now. Finally, today's webinar will be archived on OJJDP's Online University in approximately 2 weeks. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Callie. Now let's take a look at the learning objectives you can see here on the screen. I'm going to take the time and turn it over to Lieutenant Bueller.
Hello, everyone. I am Eric Bueller, Lieutenant with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department in California. I'm also the commander of the Sacramento Area Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Today we'll be talking about sexting and, most importantly, what we can do to protect our kids. So what is sexting? Webster's defines it as the sending of sexually explicit messages or images by cell phone. This is a relatively new definition that was added to Webster's, I believe, in around 2012. And it sounds simple, but the fact is it's not. If you look at this definition, you could anticipate that it would be easy to prevent your child or student from texting simply by taking their phone away from them or reducing their phone plan so that they don't have the texting capability. But the fact is that a lot of texting and ultimately sexting goes on over applications that are available for any electronic device that has Wi-Fi. One of those popular apps is Snapchat, probably one of the most prevalently used. Also has features where they can send pictures with messages that appear for only a few seconds and then disappear, and kind of gives them a feeling of security when they send these pictures. Oftentimes these pictures can be screenshotted, or there's apps that actually can record or screenshot those images, so they aren't just a fleeting flicker on a screen. It's become a growing culture with our teens today. In a recent study published by Pediatrics in 2012, they concluded that it had grown considerably in the past 3 years. So between 2009 and 2012, they determined that it had grown quite a bit. You can imagine where we are now in 2014. I'll go over some of those stats here in a minute. But overall, they considered the information that they got from this study and determined that it's become more or less the new first base in courting with teens. They found that a lot of teens actually were willing to send a nude picture of themselves to someone during the dating process or the initial process before even having sex. So some of the facts. This 2012 study was conducted with just under 1,000 kids in Texas, and the average age was just a little over 16 years old. The findings were that over 27% of them had sent a sext, over 31% had asked for a sext, and 60% had been asked. So I thought were pretty astonishing numbers. We talk about child pornography online. This is basically what's available online for mass consumption. And what they've determined is that if you look in the lower right-hand corner of that pie graph, you'll see a purple pie piece with 14%. That's self-produced child pornography, basically pictures that were taken by the victims themselves and either posted online or sent to somebody that eventually got posted online.
Yeah, what do they send that shit? I just put on there lead.
So let's talk about the damage that this can cause. I think a common scenario is, the young girl maybe in 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade, somewhere along the way, ends up meeting a boy maybe that she's enamored with at school, becomes her life. It's that time of an age where that becomes her everything. And they start talking, and next thing you know, he's asking for a sext from her, and she's having to deal with that decision kind of in a spontaneous moment. The fact is when those sexts get sent, she might think that she's sending it to him for his eyes only, and ends up getting shared with his friends, and their friends share it with other friends, and next thing you know, it's all over school. And you have to start dealing with other issues. For instance, it could be posted to social media, or even probably more common, social media becomes an area where it's talked about quite a bit with the students. Several people that know her at school end up seeing the picture, getting the picture, or just hearing about the picture, and now they're talking about it online in their social media groups like Facebook or something of that sort. And now she's having to see comments made about her body, maybe mean comments like she's ugly or calling her a slut, shaming, the cyberbullying that goes along with it. And then eventually you're dealing with the isolation, anxiety, depression issues. And some of these can be long-lasting or lifelong-lasting emotional issues. Kind of go over some of the laws pertaining to this. Child pornography, even when it's self-produced, is still, in fact, child pornography. This applies to all of those sending it, receiving it, and especially those redistributing it. Several states have adopted laws to protect victims so that they're not victimized again by the system. However, it is important to know that there are past incidents that have blown up rather quickly and included large amounts of students and ultimately became very messy. I would like to also point out, if you're looking at doing presentations or talking to kids about this, the younger aged kids like middle school talking about laws or things being against the law don't necessarily have much of an impact outside of things that are more short-term consequences. So we have to change the culture, and this comes down to parents. You have to talk to your kids. This goes for both girls and boys. We need to talk about what to do when asked for a sext. We need to give them tools of how to deal with that situation as opposed to just telling them don't do it. I can get into some of that in a further slide down the road here. But we also need to talk to the boys about not asking or pressuring others for sex as well. This needs to be a standard in our schools to address this problem with presentations and other forms of information, so that, like bullying awareness has become today in many of our schools, the dangers of sexting would be very well known and ultimately discouraged or frowned upon by their peers. And then you got to report anything that you come across of this nature immediately. Time does not heal these situations. These things are ticking time bombs, and they get more and more out of control. So the quicker that you react, if you're a teacher or administrator in the school, the better. Get law enforcement involved. And we'll look at resources that can help you raise awareness. So one of the resources on here I have is the ICAC Task Force website. If you go to that, there's presentations that are on there that you can use, a lot of information to draw from, as well as contacts on there for your state or area. And you can feel free to call or send an email. We can give you some help. We do presentations, so feel free to look into that for extra help. Also, we're the point of contact for any type of online child pornography or online enticement. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has tons of information on that. There's lots of presentations that are ready to go and use, videos and other information as well. Send This Instead app has a fantastic presentation on their website that's done in a Prezi form. And if you're not familiar with Prezi, it's kind of like PowerPoint, but it's a lot more animated and very fun and easy to use. You can sign up and get a free subscription online for it, and you can use those things right away. And they've got pretty good animations, movies, and that kind of stuff in it. Also, his app that Joe Versace has created, the Send This Instead app, has got a lot of things for kids to use when they're encountering situations where they're being asked for a sex. It gives them something that they can send instead of just saying no. That kind of diffuses the situation. There's some comic relief in there. So it's pretty good. I would recommend downloading it on your phone as an adult and taking a look at it and seeing what it is. It's pretty good tool. NetSmarts.org has some good information on there too. On the bottom left of this slide, you can see that's a flyer that they have available on there that you can print and distribute. So the Send This Instead app, they also have, I think there's 3 movies on there that are very well done, very topical and relatable for teenagers. I'm going to play part of one so you can see that call.
I'm everywhere and so alone. That's my picture on everyone's phone. Now when they stare right through me, when they're talking to me, I know what's going on. I guess this is the new famous. Now I want the anonymity. I don't feel so famous, just a total lack of pride.
Okay, I'm going to move on. But that should give you a good idea of what type of quality that they have on that site for videos and stuff, and highly recommend looking at that. NeedHelpNow.ca is an organization based in Canada. However, they take calls from the U.S. as well. But this is a site that they can go to, and they can deal with some people there that can help them get images off the internet. While it's very difficult to do, they do have some tools and avenues of getting things off the internet, so it's kind of a repair type tool that's very useful. One of the last things I want to mention is that Joe Versace, that I had mentioned earlier from Send This Instead, is doing a webinar on Thursday, December 11th, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The information or the link is right here on this slide, and I would encourage people to use it. It's actually a phenomenal application and tool to use, and he's got some very good insight on today's youth and kind of their perception and how to reach them. I think that would be fantastic to look at. And then lastly, I just want to say it's all about getting out there and communicating with our kids. Just as with anything, they have to make decisions about. The more information, the better, and slowly we can start changing the culture and creating a safer path for them. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Eric. We will now hear from Supervisory Special Agent Jake Bailey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I wanted to take some time, first of all, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit through these 2 presentations. These are 2 topics that I hold near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure Eric does as well. changing the culture, as Eric said, in today's schools and for our children is something that we have been tasked to do as either school administrators, law enforcement, or as parents. So today what I'm going to focus my time on is sextortion. So what is sextortion? All right, sextortion, basically a criminal act when someone demands something of value. And in this particular case, we're talking about images of a sexual nature, sexual favors, or sometimes even money. Okay, and how do they do it? So here's a couple ways they do it. Threatening to release or distribute material that the victim seeks to keep private. Again, these will be your images, videos, emails, or even text messages. Financial harm to friends and relatives, or withholding something that the victim needs or wants. Okay, we see this, unfortunately, this has become an increasing trend, all three of these examples. So how does it happen? Okay, it happens in several different ways, but generally it's vulnerable individuals that are targeted. Okay, hacking. This is a big problem. Obviously, we've got phones out there, tablets, emails are received on both of them, so we get malware. Theft of the personal electronic devices. Kids leave their phones with the passwords in them, leave them on their desk, someone takes them, and if they've taken these personal photos of themselves, now they're available to be shared or published on social media. Social engineering. We'll get into some case examples where people will pretend to be one person and they're really someone else, and they will either get information or pictures by basically pretending to be something they're not, and use that to get information they need to sextort somebody. So is there a relationship to sexting and bullying? Absolutely. As Eric mentioned, these are two things that are unfortunately becoming a cultural norm in today's schools. So sexting, okay, as Eric talked about, we're sending sexually explicit images from one person to another using a mobile device, such as a cell phone, but cell phone's not exclusive. So sexting is one way that someone that wants to sextort somebody comes into possession of those. And you see a lot of this with a bad breakup. Girlfriend sends boyfriend, or boyfriend sends girlfriend pictures of themselves, nude pictures of themselves, or pictures they want to be kept private, and when the relationship goes bad, they start sextorting each other, saying, send me more images, or I'm going to share these images, or vice versa. And then that can ultimately push off to bullying. So, with this last bullet here, we say when sexually explicit images of a student are distributed to others, those images often become the basis of intense bullying in the school environment. So as Eric talked about, kids, begin to point fun at other kids, their body, or something, maybe an image, something they were doing during that picture, and then becomes a problem with bullying. So there's a parent, school resource officer, or even a school administrator. Obviously this is something that has to be dealt with immediately. So I've included some examples of sextortion. So in 2013, Patrick Gunn, 31, of Montgomery, Alabama, was sentenced to 35 years in prison for producing child pornography through a massive online sextortion scheme. Over a period of more than 2 years, Gunn repeatedly used computers, chat rooms, and other social media outlets to threaten hundreds of young girls located throughout the United States and internationally. And that's him. So he targeted hundreds of girls and sextorted them. Here's another person. 2008, Jonathan Vance was sentenced, he's 24, was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. He admitted sending threatening emails to Facebook, sent threatening emails on Facebook and MySpace in order to get nude photos from more than 50 teenage girls in 3 states. He told the FBI that the intimidation and extortion made him feel empowered. And for some people, this is what it's all about. It's not even so much about the images, it's about the power and the control that they hold over the young, impressionable children, basically. That's what he looks like. Then we had 2010. We had Anthony Stansel. He was 19, 18 at the time he started, 19 when he was sentenced. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Stansel posed as 2 girls on Facebook to trick and deceive at least 31 of his male high school classmates into sending him nude cell phone photos and videos of themselves. Stansel then used those photos to extort at least 7 of his male classmates for sex. So he did this in high school. And the last example, this is a very recent case that just came down. In November 2014, Lucas Michael Chancellor, 31 of St. Johns County, Florida, was sentenced to 105 years in prison for engaging in an extortion scheme to produce child pornography. He targeted 350 child victims in 26 different states throughout the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. At this time, approximately 106 victims have been identified. So, and this, at this time, is the largest extortion case in the U.S. So you can kind of see from those examples, there's a wide range of age of the subjects, and who they go after tends to be, we'll talk about this, tends to be gender and culturally unbiased. There is no necessary like one-size-fits-all type thing. So some extent of the problem. Google Trends shows that the searches for sextortion first started to appear about 2010. That does not mean when it started. That's when it first started. They started putting a name to it. As you can see from some of those case examples, people were doing this stuff long before they called it sextortion. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received its first report related to the sextortion extortion in October of 2013. In the subsequent 8 months, they received 181 reports that could be classified as sextortion. International nexus. Absolutely, most of the cases we're seeing now have some international tie. FBI's response to that is we've involved our International Task Force, which is consistent of law enforcement officers from 40 different countries. So as we find either victims in other countries, subjects in other countries, or a combination of both, we're able to leverage our International Task Force to send leads and get immediate responses. So who's at risk? Again, it affects both boys and girls from across all demographics. So all children are at risk. So what happens? Well, victims of extortion, sextortion tend to withdraw from members of their family and can experience some of the following: anxiety, psychological, physical, or even emotional trauma, bullying, as previously discussed, increased risk for suicide, and increased rates of dropping out of school. So what can we do? For parents and educators, supervise the computer and mobile device use. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we keep computers and tablets in common rooms, but even more so than keeping them in common rooms, it's watching what they're doing. I've personally interviewed several kids that were chatting online with their subjects, and when I said, well, where were you doing this, from your bedroom? And they said, no, I was doing it in the family room, and my dad was sitting 6 feet away. And he just kept looking over his shoulder and asked me if everything was okay. And I said, yeah, no problem, as I continued to chat with an adult male in another state. So it's not only keeping them in the common rooms, but it's also making sure that we're monitoring what they're doing if that's questionable. Devices like smartphones are trickier, as many kids carry these wherever they go. So again, it's tough to monitor exactly what they're doing if they're at a friend's house and stuff. But again, as Eric talked about, open communication with your kids, showing them the dangers helps to alleviate some of those issues. You could look at disabling the camera if you feel that's going to be an issue. Parental control software, a lot of phones have it built in. Specifically, like iPhone, there's a lot of stuff that you can lock down. My kids have iPhones, and I've got some of those parental pieces of the software enabled to prevent them from doing certain things. So talk with your kids. Okay, like I said, you got to keep the open line of communication. Let them know what your worries are and what the ultimate effects of sexting and can that lead to sextortion and the bullying. You let them know about that. They should know that they should be able to come to you without fear of reprisal. A lot of kids that I've interviewed have said, oh, I would have told my parents, but thought I was going to get in trouble. And they have to know that they can come to you and they can ultimately say this is what's going on, and therefore you can get help through law enforcement. Genuine interest in their online activities, not just, hey, what are you doing there on the internet, but if they say something, hey, I'm on this new chat program. Find out what it is, show an interest, and understand what they're doing, and maybe, and this is not just for parents, it's also for the educators. If you see kids that are, on new chat programs and stuff, you can find out what they are and see, is this a dangerous program that they're on. Remember, those exploited through these crimes are victims, no matter what they did or how they responded to the threat. And that's something that, as both parents and educators, we need to keep in mind, that in the end, a lot of these kids, they are victims, they are young, and they're very impressionable. Okay, security. So we talk about, at the beginning, hacking. People get into phones, they get into the tablets, they get into the computers, and a lot of the kids, well, it's too hard to type in passwords, I don't want to remember it, so I either don't use a password or I use 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, we want to work with your kids on creating a strong password. Before they're going to open attachments in email, this is obviously where the malware comes into play. A lot of people are like, oh, cool, someone sent me something, and they immediately open it. They have no idea who sent it, and like, oh, this is junk mail. But once they've opened that attachment, the malware is already in place and could possibly be feeding images, passwords, text messages, or other various things through malware right back to an originating source. Update software. So obviously you want to keep your software updated, so when holes are found in the software, whether it's through a web internet service providing like Google or Internet Explorer or any program, you want to keep those up to date, so you keep the bad guys out. Again, firewalls, anti-malware software, and again, possibly even encryption. If you fear the phone's going to get lost or someone's going to break into it, obviously you were looking at some extreme steps here, but sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry. And again, don't assume technology alone will protect you. Again, the ultimate security is an open dialogue with your kids. Reporting sextortion. We at the FBI, we actively investigate sextortion crimes. And it's important to report these. A lot of kids, there's fear of reprisal and they don't want to report it either to their parents or what will the kids say at school. But ultimately, as you can see from those case examples, not one of those persons got jammed up for going after one person. Even though that is a crime, you see that they are targeting, tens, 20, even hundreds of victims at one time. So once one person speaks out, we can go after these people. In some cases, the perpetrator may be a teenager. However, it's uncommon that the perpetrator is an adult. It's not uncommon that the perpetrator is masquerading as is an adult masquerading as a teenager. So basically, you're going to see subjects of all walks of life. I mean, Mr. Stansel was masquerading as on Facebook as two females. I mean, so you're going to have people doing all sorts of things to get what they want, to get those pictures. Some of them are straight up. Other ones, you'll have kids masquerading as adults, adults masquerading as kids, and every combination in between. Law enforcement can help you make that determination. So again, as a school administrator, as a parent, if you see this type of stuff, we want to report it, and then we can kind of get involved and we can help. We work hand in hand with the ICACs, we work with the local law enforcement, and again, to help identify who these subjects are and immediately begin an investigation to get these guys wrapped up and stop the sextortion. A parent's report may result in the rescue of dozens or even hundreds of other children. So that's one thing to always keep in mind, that as you report, it can also it can ultimately not just result in the recovery of your own child and the rescue of your own child, but it can be hundreds. So reporting. Okay, report suspected sextortion crimes, or to get help from law enforcement, you can contact your local FBI office. And again, we work continuously hand in hand with our local partners, both state and local, with our ICACs, again, to handle these matters jointly. We work with the International Task Force. We do find that a majority of, or not a majority, but a lot of our cases do have international nexuses, and with our international task force, we're able to, again, leverage that capability to further identify these subjects quickly and apprehend them as quick as possible and recover the children. So, so the takeaway that I wanted to leave you guys with is for the school administrators, I'm hoping that you have a better understanding of what sextortion is, how it affects the children at your school, and ultimately how it affects the you yourselves as the administrators as far as with regards to the bullying that could possibly occur in your school and who to contact. For law enforcement partners that may be listening today, again, we like to work these cases jointly with you guys. You guys always bring good expertise with the school resource officers. You have in-depth knowledge of what's going on in those schools particularly. We love working joint cases with you guys and, again, using our international task force to help bridge that gap, whether it's state to state or even, like I said, international. For the parents that might be listening, again, a better understanding of what sextortion is, what you can do to prevent your child from being a victim of sextortion while they're either at home or while they may be away from the house. And then ultimately, what can you do if your child comes to you and says, I am a victim of sextortion, or I'm being, someone's making me give them pictures and I don't want to, and you would know that as sextortion, you've recognized it, and now you know what to do, which is you can call local law enforcement, you can call the FBI. So I appreciate your guys' time today, and look forward to working together with the Department of Education here in the future to help change the culture in our schools and prevent any more sextortion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Eric. We do have some questions here. First, regarding sexting, are there statistics looking at males versus females as victims of sexting?
I imagine that there are. I'd have to look through the study that I went through, but I'm not sure offhand, but I'm sure that there is some information on that.
Okay, thank you. And as a follow-up, we talk a lot about girls as victims. Are there incidences of males as victims?
Yes, there are. Absolutely.
What would you tell a child or a teen to do if they accidentally received a sext on their phone, or if they accidentally sent a sext?
They need to report it, ultimately delete it, and definitely not distribute it to anybody else.
As a follow-up to that, if a teen takes a nude picture of themselves, is this in and of itself illegal, or only the distribution? And there is a specific example where if the teen takes a photo on their phone, the photo then backs up to the iCloud. Has the teen committed the crime of transmitting child pornography if it's a nude image?
Yeah, if there's no intent of transmitting it, it's not really like a distribution, but you're still producing it technically, so it is technically, under the law, producing child pornography. Like I said, different states deal with it in different ways. Some have created a different clause to make it a misdemeanor versus a felony. Some have made it so that they're completely protected. So it just depends on your jurisdiction.
Is sexting or sextortion a part of human trafficking?
I'll let Jake answer that one.
Again, that's kind of a very broad question, but I would say, on the surface, no, it's not part of human trafficking, no.
Thank you. For both sexting and sextortion, you talked a little bit about this, but how exactly are individuals finding targets?
Well, I would say for sextortion, it's a lot of ways. I mean, some of it's the tried and tested way, which is I'm going to go online. We've developed, as Eric said, a culture now where everybody wants to be, have lots of friends. Everybody wants someone following them. So whether it's with Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or any of those other social media, a lot of it is a guy will go out and a guy or girl could potentially go out and create alias Facebook profiles and then say, hey, I'm going to be coming to your school next year, or hey, I got to the school late. And then once they're friended, they will spend time developing friendships with people that they've targeted specifically and ultimately get them to send photos, whether they send photos of previous victims to that person, say, well, here's pictures of me, now you send me pictures of you, and then it begins. It's like, hey, I've got these photos. If you don't send me more, I'm going to send them to whomever. So that's some of the easiest ways. Then you do have some of these subjects that I mentioned. If you actually read on the internet exactly what they did, some of them got very technical, and they actually would target somebody in their school that they were either mad at or really wanted to see what they look like naked, would actually hack into their computer and steal the images out of their computer, or activate a webcam that was in their room and then would just record everything going on in the room so they would catch the boy or girl changing or something to that effect. So there's various ways that they pick to target. Usually it just depends on the motive behind that individual.
Talking about charges, do some states have a Romeo and Juliet clause? If two teens are in a relationship, I guess, less than 4 years apart and they're dating, is it hard to convict them of a crime?
I'm not exactly sure on that. I know of a handful of states that have created some different laws pertaining to that. I'm not completely familiar with the Romeo and Juliet clause.
Another question is, what is the most popular app that would allow a person to change their sending number, such as harassing a person by sending a nude picture but produces a fake number from where it came from?
Jacob, would you have the answer to that?
I wouldn't be able to say I know the most popular. I know there are several apps out there that are capable of doing something like that, basically spoofing where something came from either by email or phone number. I wouldn't know what is the most popular app out there right now, but I know there's many. I mean, I'm sure given enough time I could probably figure it out, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
Jake, as a follow-up question, what is the typical sentence for sextortion by a juvenile?
As the FBI, we do not prosecute juveniles. That would definitely be, we prosecute 18 and up. And if it's a juvenile that's responsible, generally that, the nice thing is when we work these cases is we work them with our state and local partners. If it is a juvenile, generally we'll hand that off to the state, because the state, in certain circumstances, will prosecute a juvenile. But again, a lot of times they look at, kind of the whole gamut, of the investigation and determine the overall malice, if you will, and we'll give a sentence. So as far as what their general sentences are, they're not. I haven't seen any juveniles prosecuted for this where I'm from in Texas. I'm sure it happens. I'd have to do some research to get a general idea of a juvenile, but you can see with the examples that I gave, they can range. I did have a case example that ultimately I didn't include, and it involved a guy that got 18 months, and then you saw Mr. Chancellor got 105 years. So from the 18 years, are basically adults being charged with it. I've seen probation all the way up now to Mr. Chancellor got 105 years. Again, for minors, we don't, in the FBI, don't prosecute minors we don't prosecute minors in general, but specifically for sextortion, so I don't have that number for you.
Okay, thank you. And this can go to either you, Jake, or to Eric, but how would you go about combating a complacent parent who says, my kid would never do that?
I would definitely, they have to accept the fact that they don't know everything that their kid's doing, and they have to talk to their kids, and it has to be something that they do early and often. The complacent parent that just goes about life thinking that this will never happen to their kid is often the one that ends up finding out it has.
I absolutely agree with Eric. I think he hit the nail right on the head. You know, that idea of parenting in today's culture, kind of as Eric said, you know, we are in a complete and total digital cultural shift now, where, you know, kids as young as, you know, 6, 7, 8 all have cell phones that have capabilities of taking pictures and stuff, and, you know, talking to them often and knowing what they're doing. They have to do that, and if it's my kid would never do that, that usually tends to be the kid that gets involved in that type of stuff. So he hit the nail right on the head on that.
And that's one of the reasons why they use, you know, the kids use apps to do texting and things like that, because some of the parents that do monitor the cell phones are looking at what texts they're sending in a regular text message, or what they're doing on their Facebook. And, you know, by the time their parents were getting on Facebook, you know, the kids have already moved on to something different. And those apps allow them to have conversations back and forth, and they're virtually something that you can't detect on their phones or their electronic devices. And so what you're monitoring is more or less obsolete uses of their electronics to a certain degree with some kids.
Thank you for that. In case a child or a teen is already a victim of sexting or sextortion, are there support groups or educational groups that will help them?
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I had mentioned, the needhelpnow.ca, and they do have information on there regarding some support, as well as helping them get these images off of the internet.
And, you know, in our investigations, you know, when we come across victims, you know, we have our Office of Victims Assistance, which will provide victim services to children that are victims of sextortion. So, you know, we have an internal program that ultimately does work with NCMEC and other agencies to provide, you know, counseling and those type of resources to victims that have been identified as part of our investigations.
Okay, thank you. A question just came in. Should the picture be reported if it's for sexting before deleting it, or should the picture be saved until after you report it?
In our circumstances here, in the investigations we do, obviously it would be better for the investigation to have it as opposed to deleting it. Although if it is deleted off the phone, we do have ways of still retrieving it. The reason why we kind of push for the just deleting it right away kind of thing is for the safety of the person who originally sent it. And if that picture ends up getting redistributed because, you know, they're holding on to it to show law enforcement, and you know, the faster it's deleted, the better for the victim. But ultimately for the case, yeah, it would be better to have it still for us to be able to save it.
Okay.
If we're going to do a criminal investigation, that is. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Thinking about technology, are there any projected plans, whether with the FBI or at the state level, to monitor predators and their technology as it continues to get more and more sophisticated?
Are we talking about predators that once they've been released from prison? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, I guess you could say from released from prison, and then also kind of if you're aware of predators while they're still, before they've gone to prison, how you go about monitoring their technology. Are you thinking about changing that, or has it been changing?
Well, again, you know, the question's very broad, but, you know, what I can speak to specifically is, you know, when we identify, you know, a subject, you know, obviously in this country we're innocent until proven guilty, but once we identify a subject and they are ultimately, you know, arrested, they are taken in front of a judge, and then the judge will determine if they are ultimately a, you know, a flight risk, threat to society, that type of stuff. And if they are released back out, the judge a lot of times will make, in these cases, will apply certain monitoring, you know, you can't be around kids. If they're going to be on a computer, it has to have monitoring software. If they can't have access to a phone. If they do, it has to have monitoring software. So, at least on the federal side of the house, and I'm sure, some of this definitely happens on the state side of the house as well, that, once a subject is identified and has been taken into custody, if they were released out before, ultimate, either a plea or a trial and sentence, there are some type of monitoring that's in place. As far as when they get out, most of these, but I can't necessarily say all, are usually have to register as a sex offender, and then some of them definitely have conditions of their release, once they are released from prison, and some of it includes monitoring for a certain amount of time, whether it's their cell phones or computers. So it does happen. Does it happen long enough? Some would argue yes, some would definitely argue no. So are there plans to change it? I don't have an answer for that, but that's currently how it does work.
Thank you. To follow up on something that was said earlier regarding consequences, if younger children are not swayed by the possibility of prosecution, what kind of immediate consequences do you suggest?
Well, I think the immediate consequences that they're going to run into is the bullying and the exposure that once that picture is out there, you can't get it back. Even if it's a solid relationship, like Jacob was talking about, these relationships they sometimes end abruptly and messy, and the picture is still out there, and then it can be utilized and sent out and shown to others, and when they realize that the immediate consequences is going to be walking around at school or on social network or whatever, and having to deal with the shaming that will go on afterwards.
It was said that, have you experienced resistance by social media sites when you request information about a crime?
I'm not sure. I didn't quite understand the question.
So I guess if you're trying to request information from social media sites, if it's referring to a sex, have you encountered difficulty?
Yeah, some of them are definitely more cooperative than others. So most of the big ones are fairly cooperative. We end up getting the information based on a search warrant. But there are other social media sites that are run in other countries and that won't even respond to an email.
All right, that's good to know. As a school resource officer, how do I handle sexting or sextortion in schools?
I would definitely use that ability to be present there, and you have the kids' attention a lot to actually put on a presentation and make it a part of the school's regular curriculum when, even possibly as early as the time that they're doing sex education in 4th grade or maybe in 5th grade, right about that age, start talking about it and getting that awareness out there. I've known girls that have fallen down this road in 7th grade, and in 8th grade they did an assembly and talked about cyberbullying and then touched on sexting, but it's a year too late at that point for her.
And I would also say, as a school resource officer, obviously, that person is there, boots on the ground, and is able to make an immediate difference. And if, as a school resource officer, you identify sexting or sextortion, I mean, that's something that I would say immediately, especially with sextortion, needs to be brought to law enforcement, because, again, if you find a child that is giving off some indicators, or the school resource officer is able to specifically identify a child as being sextorted, the only way, as Eric said in his presentation, it's not going to get better. It's not just going to get better by itself. Obviously, there's going to need to be intervention, and usually that's going to be law enforcement that's going to have to get involved to help rescue the child.
All right, thank you. That's some good advice. As a follow-up question, when I asked about social media, are you aware of anyone working on legislation to require social networking websites and other providers to cooperate with law enforcement investigations when sexting, porn, and minors are involved?
Well, anytime that if they have and operate a site that contains any type of images that are considered child pornography, they definitely have the duty to act on that, and that's where we get a lot of our tips is from these sites.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, if there's child exploitation material involved, there is law out there that says that they do have to report it to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have to make a report, and then then the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children will disseminate that out to FBI, to the ICACs. So I would say that, as Eric said, the majority of the social media sites that operate within the United States, they comply with that implicitly. It's when we deal with these social media sites that are run in other countries that are not bound by the U.S. laws, that ultimately becomes a problem because they're not bound by our U.S. laws.
All right. Well, I want to take the time and thank you both so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate your time and expertise being shared with